So normally I share about what we've been reading in our homeschool, as well as maybe some like independent reads, and then I ask my kids for recommendations, what they've enjoyed, and usually I'll throw like one or two in that I've enjoyed and I would recommend to you as well. But today I want to do something a little bit different. I want to share the top reads for myself for this past summer. So I read over 20 books this summer, and by read, I typically listen to books. I prefer audiobooks. I can get a lot done, but I did read a few physical copies as well. And there were a few that, like, out of 5 stars, they were great. They were 5 stars. So I'm gonna share my top ones with you. I'm gonna start with the 4s, and then I'll share the 5 stars. And then I'm gonna really quickly run through the rest of the books I read this summer that weren't really for me, just because sometimes it can be helpful to have another person give a review of a book that maybe you're thinking about reading. So the very first book is The Mother's Secret, and this is by Catherine Croft. And the reason I gave this one 4 stars was it was a little bit confusing, but it did keep me guessing right till the end. It's kind of like a thriller type mystery book. It's about a woman who really wants to be a mother, but then she becomes a mother and she ends up abandoning her child and her husband and going off and starting a new life. And it's kind of like why she did that, but also somebody seems to know her secret and has given her a deadline to come clean by a certain point. And so it's the story of why she made the choices that she did and what happens when she decides like what to do in the future. So that one I gave 4 stars to. The next one is a nonfiction, and it's called Building a Non-Anxious Life, and it's by John Deloney. I think that's how you say his name. This is a book that I felt was really helpful to take a deep look at not just anxiety, but like the kind of life that we live these days and how to make a shift from being so anxious and the things we can change and the things we can kind of curate our life to be like so that we are less anxious. I wish it had gone a little bit further, which is why I only gave it 4 stars, but it was definitely one that I feel like everybody could benefit from reading, and I definitely did. The next book that I enjoyed is called Scarlet Feather, and it's by Maeve Binchy. And this one takes place in Dublin. And personally, I really do enjoy books that take place in the UK as well as in Australia. The lingo, the culture, I just like these kind of books. And so this one takes place in Dublin. It's about 2 friends who start a catering business and just kind of the story of what happens. And it's not some like big, amazing book or there's a big one event that happens. It's just kind of all these little stories going on at the same time, and relationships and family and community. And I really enjoyed it. I can't even fully explain why, but it was just a nice book to listen to. There were sad parts, there were funny parts. I just really enjoyed that book. So check that out if you kind of like those like UK type books as well. A book that a couple friends both recommended to me was Anne's House of Dreams by Ellen Montgomery. And it's number 5 in the series of Anne books. I'd only read book 1, so I think it would have made a little bit more sense to me if I had read kind of books 2 to 4 before reading book 5. But nevertheless, I still felt like it was a good book. It's about friendship, it's about women, it's about life, and it's just a really nice story, particularly about friendship. I felt like it was missing a little bit, I'm not quite sure what, and that it ended maybe a bit abruptly, but then it's a series, right? So maybe that's the reason why. So I gave that book 4 stars. While actually searching for that book to listen to, I came across one called House of Dreams, The Life of L.M. Montgomery, and this is by Liz Rosenberg. And I ended up listening to this book as well, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. If you listen to it, the narrator's voice is, you have to get over it. It's not the best voice. And it is written in a kind of simple form. I can see it's not like super advanced writing, but I knew very little about Lucy Maud Montgomery. In fact, she likes to be called Maud, or she did. Not Lucy or LM, just Maud. I didn't realize what a tough life that she had. And this book goes through and explains both her upbringing as well as through like adolescence, through marriage and motherhood and so on, and how much of her and her experiences are in her books. So that was really interesting for me. I love learning about people and about the reasons why they do things and the reasons like why this author would write certain genre and things. So if you like Anne of Green Gables or you just want to know more about Ellen Montgomery, check this book out because it was very, very insightful. Next is the book Live and Let Chai by Bree Baker. This was a fun mystery book. So it's actually one in a series. It's the very first book. And it's about a person who opens a sweet tea shop in her hometown and there's a murder. And she has to kind of prove her innocence and she's trying to find out who killed this person in order to clear her own name. It kept me guessing till the end. It's a little bit cheesy, a little bit like Hallmarky somewhat, but it was good. I enjoyed it. I think I may listen to another book in this series because again, it kept me guessing and it was entertaining. It was kind of a lighter book. There's no like gruesome or gore, anything like that. So a little bit of romance in there. It was a good book. I would recommend that one. And finally, the last one that I gave 4 stars to is called Arthur, the Dog Who Crossed the Jungle to Find a Home, and it's by Mikkel Lindnord. This was just a sweet book. And I actually just realized, or I just found out that there's a movie that came out this year that's based on the book. So I'm hoping to watch that hopefully this weekend and see the differences. I can tell from the trailer they've changed quite a bit. It's a story of someone from Sweden who's like an adventure runner, and this dog suddenly shows up while he is in Ecuador doing this race, and the dog just follows him and will not leave him alone. He ends up bringing the dog home to Sweden, and it's the story of how it came to be, how they found each other, what he was doing there, how it was bringing him home. It was really interesting. I found it a little bit confusing, and I'm not sure if it was originally written in English or maybe it was written in Swedish and translated. But it was a simple book and a little confusing how it jumped back and forth with the time like differences. But it was just a sweet story and I'm looking forward to watching the movie. So moving on to the ones I gave 5 out of 5 stars to. The very first one I actually have right here, and that's this book here. Eating on the Wild Side, The Missing Link to Optimum Health. And this is by Jo Robinson. This is a book that I enjoyed so much I bought my own copy of, and I'm not a big bookkeeper, but this one I felt was so good and so important that I purchased my own copy of it. And what it is it's divided into 2 sections, vegetables and fruits, and it goes through and it names a bunch of different ones, and it talks about where they came from, where did they originate, how were they originally used, and then it goes through the domestication process and how it spread across the world and how it's eaten today. And some of it was technical, but it's just written in a way that's easy to understand and that is so enlightening. And it talks about how to make the choices of the fruit and vegetables you eat now a little bit healthier. Things like eating open lettuce versus closed growing lettuce. And it explains why. Things like if you're going to put garlic in the food you eat, to chop it or to like mix it up, and let it sit for a good 10 minutes before you cook it, and it explains why. I also found the corn on the cob so interesting, as well as I had seen, green and purple cauliflower at the grocery store, and I was like, what are they doing? Why are they making them colorful? But it turns out that the white ones that we eat was actually like a mutation, an albino mutation, and it used to be more colorful, and those are starting to come back in. So yeah, just totally fascinating. If you're interested in food and the history of food and maybe making some slightly healthier choices, I definitely recommend this book. The other thing I liked about it is at the end of each chapter, let me see here, it has a section for recommended varieties that you'd find in the supermarket, and then ones you would find in like the farmer's market or a specialty store. and just kind of explaining for gardeners as well why they're good to grow. And then it has a points to remember for each section. So it kind of like puts it all down into just some basic facts. So one of the reasons I wanted the book, you know, to mark up and stuff is to choose seeds to grow in our garden for next year. So things like growing arugula instead of romaine. And I'm gonna go through this book. I'm really looking forward to it and kind of mark things up and order seeds according to things that are gonna give us a little bit more nutrition. So that was 5 stars from me for sure. The next book is called Quiet Power: The Secret Strengths of Introverts by Susan Cain. This book is written to like children, middle school, teenage kind of age children. There's another book called Quiet by the author, which I have not read, but this particular one I really enjoyed. I wish this book had existed when I was a kid, because I have always thought through my life that if you're an introvert, you need to be more extroverted. You need to be more out there. And the truth is, you don't necessarily. And it's really interesting because she goes into some of the scientific experiments that have been done. Things like they had people testing lemons, and those who identify as introverts actually are more sensitive to the lemon than those who are extroverts. And that's just one very quick example. She has all the science and the studies to back those things up. But like I said, this is geared towards kids. So it talks about different kids who were or are introverted and kind of how they've made their way in the world. But I also really appreciated at the end of the book, there's a section for teachers and there's a section for parents. And I think it's so important because a lot of our school and societal setups are really geared for extroverts. But there's some techniques that you can use to include introverts into the conversation. One that they mentioned is to say, I'm going to ask a question. I want everyone to take 30 seconds to think about it, and then I'll get your reactions. And that just gives introverts a little bit more time to kind of process the question and to see, do they want to share an answer, but to give them time to think through. So this is a book that whether you're a teacher, a parent, or you're an introvert, or you're a teen who's an introvert, I would recommend that you read. I think everyone can benefit from this. The next book that I really enjoyed is called The Maid of Fairborn Hall. This is by Julie Clausen. It's a story of a very wealthy young lady who has kind of been pampered her whole life. It's the early 1900s. And in order to, well, I won't spoil it too much, but she has to escape from her family basically and go into hiding for a period of time. And she ends up becoming a maid in another very wealthy household. And it's just the story of why she left and what goes on in this new household. And it's kind of that difference between like the very wealthy and the prim and proper and the maids and the staff, and kind of that divide between them. It was really interesting. I listened to it right after I finished watching Downton Abbey series, so maybe that's why I enjoyed it even more. But it was just a good story. It was quite long. I think it was about 12 hours to listen to, and it was fascinating to me. So I really enjoyed that one. This brings me to the last book, which is probably my favorite read of the entire summer, and it's called The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. It's based on a midwife in Maine in, I believe it's the late 1800s, sometime around there. And a man is found dead, frozen in the river. And it's the story of what happens. And it's really interesting to me because it's historical fiction. So it's based on a true person. It's based on some real court records. And midwives were allowed to testify in court on certain occasions, whereas women just in general were not. But it's also about her journal entries, which she kept. And this is how we know so much about her. And she kept records of births and deaths. And this particular book involves things like the murder and who did it, rape, abuse, just everything that midwives had to deal with. And I found it so fascinating, from everything from the actual person and learning about who she was and what we know about her and how she kept these records, to the story that was the made up part based on some of the factual events. It's a little hard to explain, but 5 out of 5. If I could give it 6 out of 5, I probably would. Just the wisdom. It talks about like different herbs and the way they treated different things. Kind of everything I really personally enjoy all rolled into one story. And it was in Maine, which is not too far from me, so I thought that was pretty cool. So those are the top books that I read this summer. Let me know if you have read any of them down below, and I'm curious what you thought of them. I'm gonna share really quickly the other books I read and what number of stars out of 5 I gave them. I'm just gonna run through them real quick for you. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, 2 stars. My Perfect Daughter by Sarah A. Denzil, 3 stars. If the Creek Don't Rise by Leah Weiss, 3 stars. He'll Be Waiting by Liz Alterman, 3 stars. One of Us is Dead by Geneva Rose, 3 stars. A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, 3 stars. Beautifully Broken Pieces by Catherine Cowles, 3 stars. Hope, Grace, and Faith by Leah Messer, 3 stars. The Numbers Game by Daniel Steele, 2 stars. The Webs We Weave by Michelle Morgan, 3 stars. I hope that you've had a great summer, and if there's a book that you really enjoyed reading, let me know in the comment section down below because, like I said, I always love getting recommendations from other people. Otherwise, though, I hope that this finds you having a great day. Take care.